Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural national edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. Guess what? It's inaugural weekend, and we're going to talk all about the inauguration. Candy Woodall, who's the politics editor for the Baltimore Sun, is joining us. And full disclosure, I'm one of the co-owners. And Jarrett Stepman is a columnist for the Daily Signal. We welcome you both to the broadcast. Happy 2025, and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you.
So let me start with Candy. Candy, how many inaugurations have you covered? Why is this one so different? And how did Jimmy Carter, through bringing everyone together for his funeral a week or so ago, set the tone where all those bruised relationships and those who had not been in the same room, had not spoken to each other, were all together, and because of his great legacy, sort of warmed the freeze?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I've been covering inaugurations since George W. Bush was inaugurated. And this year is different for a few reasons, but especially for how far we've come in 7 months. Think about this. The incoming president, who was a former president, there was an assassination attempt on his life July 13th in Butler, Pennsylvania. And him raising his fist in the air, saying fight, 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 became iconic, not just for the photo, but for the message. And as he takes the oath of office soon, this is the moment he and his supporters were fighting for, to change the direction of the country they were concerned about. And in the past, when Trump was elected in 2016, he had a lot more resistance going into office, even though now he has more critics. He's grown more critics in 8 years, but he seems to have more people willing to work with him. That includes some Democrats, even from Maryland. And the moment that you're referring to at Jimmy Carter's funeral, where you saw him and former President Obama sharing a moment, people are dying to know what they said to each other, by the way. But I think when you see those moments, it's a healing moment for the country, too, to show that we can all come together in these big moments. And I think that really sets the stage for the inauguration. You're likely to see some of the same leaders you saw at Jimmy Carter's funeral behind President Trump on the inauguration stage.
Jarrett Stepman, already, it seems like it's a different Donald Trump. His graciousness during the death of former President Jimmy Carter, less rhetoric on his part. He seems to be working overtime to organize his cabinet and his policies, what he would like to do. And then he also has shown his willingness to compromise with the new Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, that he may not get everything he wants on immigration and inflation, and we've got to compromise and work together.
Yeah, I really think actually he's very much risen in stature as a statesman and come into his own. I think it's actually quite a bit different than when he initially was elected in 2016. I think he was very much a political neophyte. This was all very new. I think many people were even shocked that he had become president. This time around feels very different. Now, maybe in part is driven by the fact that he had this assassination attempt on his life that certainly could change anyone. It definitely changed the outlook of Ronald Reagan when he barely survived his assassination attempt back in the 80s. I think Trump is more in full command of how he wants to do things in Washington, D.C. this time around. He went through a harrowing 4 years. It's quite incredible looking back on where things stood 4 years ago, where Trump was being blackballed by all social media, where he was really being unpersoned, and now marching back into Washington, D.C., triumphant, when I'd say he's probably more popular than he's ever been since his time in politics. I think that's quite incredible. And I think that you're seeing now a real revolution taking place where the establishment tried desperately to defeat him Trump now comes in with a major mandate, a real understanding of what he wants to do as president, understanding of how he can command in the White House. And so I think this is a big deal. This is in some ways a larger political revolution than what took place in 2016, and why I think you see so many people that are seemingly willing to work with Trump for the first time after being hashtag resistant last time around.
You know, before we go to a quick break, Ken, we cannot forget about the graciousness of the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, when she certified her defeat to certify him as president. No resistance, no controversy. It was so peaceful, started so quickly, ended so quickly, quite different from 4 years ago.
Yes, it was quite different. And we had one of our Washington reporters, Sam Janish, covering that. And he noted in his story how she was essentially certifying her own loss. And that day, and how smooth it went, as you noted, that's normally how the transition of power goes in our country. 4 years ago was unusual.
That is an understatement. Jarrett Stepman and Ken Woodall are joining us for today as we talk about the inauguration and Donald Trump, and we'll be back. Jarrett Stepman is a columnist for the Daily Signal, and Ken Woodall, the politics editor at the Baltimore Sun. What did it mean for him, Jarrett, for John Thune, now the Senate Majority Leader, and he and the President-elect have not always been on the same page, to all but assure him that every cabinet person that he's chosen will be confirmed?
Yeah, that's extremely important. I mean, I think there was initially some blowback to at least one of Trump's picks, and Matt Gaetz, who eventually withdrew from that nomination. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to get all these picks through and right away. I mean, to a certain extent, time's a wasting. Trump will only have one term in the White House. It's important the agenda moves along very quickly. Of course, the first 100 days are oftentimes seen as a time which is most important for a president to have his agenda on the table and get legislation passed. And time really will be of essence. So it's important for Trump to be on the same page with both Thune and the Speaker of the House, Speaker Mike Johnson. That's part of the reason why he was so eager to back Johnson, despite some opposition, I think, some on the right, to him being the Speaker of the House. I think Trump understood that he can't be wasting time, essentially, with political back and forth and changing the man in charge now. I think he needs to work very closely with those in Congress if he wishes to actually have a legislative agenda that's actually pushed through, which is extremely important, of course, to his legacy and how his term actually carries out from going forward.
So, Candy, with that in mind, what are some of the top policy goals Trump and his administration can prioritize based on the fact that Democrats, Republicans are willing to work together on? Some people have said there's something they could do in the area of foreign policy, immigration, inflation. What do you think there are things that they can show that they can work together on?
Thank you for that question. It's a good one. And I just want to note that Trump did not wait, and he's not waiting until January 20th to get started. He basically started running his next administration immediately after he won. And he's been wielding power on Capitol Hill. He's already had people who've spoken out against him now falling in line behind him. He's had a lot of help from Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. I think some of the top legislative priorities you're going to see, one, I think they're going to immediately get to work on the border. That's based on some of my conversations with Republicans. That's a top priority for a lot of people. And you see that even Democrats across the country, according to polling and according to even some of their votes recently, that they do believe something needs to be done. So I think that there's something coming pretty quickly on immigration. And another thing, I think they're targeting environmental policies that they think are maybe too punitive to businesses or that pass on too many high costs to Americans. I know when I talked to House Freedom Caucus leader Andy Harris of Maryland, he told me that on day one, offshore wind production is done.
So let me come back to Jarrett. We noticed that Elon Musk is already conceding the probability that they're not going to find $2 trillion to cut. It seems that they're also dealing with some realism as they move from the campaign to governance, Jarrett.
Yeah, Armstrong, it's always that difficulty in making any kind of efficiencies in the federal government, which has certainly exploded since the time of the founding of this country. As the country has exploded, I think that they are going to run into a lot of challenges. I do know that the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, is a very important project of Musk and Trump. I do hope they will find areas not just of inefficiency and cost cutting, but areas in which these various agencies have done things that have been imperious and tyrannical toward Americans. I think there's a larger concern that we have government bureaucracy out of control, not just in how much money it wastes, but how much it's gone after individual American citizens in the country, how much it's actually taken the governing powers away from Congress and the elected authorities in this country and taken it up for itself. And I think that's going to be a huge challenge of Trump's presidency. I think that Musk hopefully will be a huge integral ingredient into actually changing that dynamic and getting control of the so-called deep state, the bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. that's taking control of our government, it seems, in many cases.
What is it that the president needed to do in terms of foreign policy?
Well, I think one of the things the president needs to do is keep his promises to voters. We're already getting some messages and emails from voters who are saying, why Greenland? I don't want him focusing on these things. I elected him to get costs under control. So they're expecting to see something, especially these moderate voters who, maybe swung more Republican this time. And then I think people really want to see an end to foreign conflicts. They want to see an end to the Russia and Ukraine war. They want to see an end to Middle Eastern wars, Israel and Hamas especially. So I think that those are things they're looking to Trump for some leadership on.
We're going to take a quick break here and come back with Candy Woodall and Jarrett Stepman. Don't go away.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion. And that is, there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. Candy, how has the media's approach to covering inaugurations changed over the years, and how do traditional and social media differ in their framing of inaugural events?
Well, thank you for that question. If you want to go really far back, a lot of it was, felt like it came a day late. Now we can, with all the tools we have, we can really report out what's going on in the moment, and not just covering on TV or, on websites, but also social media. We will have social video that day, riding with people who are going to the inauguration, traveling by trains between Baltimore and DC. We'll be covering their journey from beginning to end. We'll have sort of a behind the scenes look at things before it begins. And then, of course, there'll be plenty coming out during and while the incoming president is speaking. And then also after, because immediately it'll be the reaction in DC from Capitol Hill, but also in Annapolis, where the Maryland General Assembly will be meeting. So we will have all of that coverage, and that's a definite difference now from even 10, 12, and especially 20 years ago. There's just so much more that media can share with the audience and the public about what's going on, what they're seeing, and then especially what's going on behind the scenes.
But Jarrett, how can these same journalists strike a balance between critical analysis and constructive coverage to restore their own credibility and trust in the public?
Yeah, that's going to be very difficult. And I think that, we've seen, especially in the last 4 years, the entire media landscape be shaken and change. I mean, there now is a new media environment that challenges the old legacy media. You have, of course, Musk's X that has been now incredibly potent in getting Trump's message, or really any alternative messages out. And, you said it there as far as having some balance, objectivity. I think the last time Trump came into office, he was seen as an alien force that was not welcome in D.C. There were protests that took place. Now I think he's actually, in some ways, been normalized to a lot of Americans, many of whom were sort of more moderate voters who now are looking at him for the first time as not that evil, horrible man who's going to end democracy as we know it. And this is going to be a real challenge to the media that portrayed him in such negative light in the last 4 years to cover him like they would another president. And I hope they do. I think they have examples from the other presidents that they've covered. I think this case, things shouldn't be any different. This is what the American people chose. I think this shows a new beginning, and play it straight. I think it's pretty simple, actually.
Candy, Trump was recently spared probation, jail, a fine during his hush money sentencing days before the inauguration. Does this lift the weight, a burden? How does this play into it?
I think being elected lifted his legal burdens.
Yes.
I think being elected was really what changed everything.
Yes.
And I think the sentencing that you might be referring to on January 10th, I think that was always viewed and known to be basically a formality. But I wanted to respond a little bit to what the questions of covering, with fairness. I think that there have been some extraordinary shifts from the last election cycle, even seeing, major outlets not endorsing candidates. You've seen a lot of those changes, the media landscape changing, and seeing that podcasting had such a bigger role in where people were getting their information. And so I think where people get their news has changed a lot. And so you see a lot of media companies evolving to meet that moment. And I think that will continue over time. And how Trump is covered by legacy media and new media. And really, he's the first president we've ever had who has his own platform, and that's Truth Social. So that also creates a unique situation for anybody covering him.
Jarrett, Donald Trump is going to complete his second term. Think about the historical significance, and just think about 2 years ago, he was considered dead, washed up, people abandoning him. And even the people that are closest to him now who is appointed has said some of the most critical things about him. And yet they said he could not win or get voters beyond his base. And now he has a trifecta. Wow.
It's incredible. I honestly think this is one of maybe the greatest political comeback in American history. I mean, people talk about Grover Cleveland back in the 19th century having a second term, but I don't even think that compares to what Trump's been through, especially given how much you could say the institutions and establishment were against him, tried to bury his career, tried to bury his movement, literally tried to have him arrested and thrown in jail. And this is really a capstone of that. Suddenly he's marching back into Washington, D.C., more popular than he's ever been. I think he actually now for the first time has a net positive set of polls compared to how he was, which is quite remarkable. This really feels like a political revolution that he's ushered in. I don't think there's any question at this point. The question, of course, now is what's Trump going to do with that historic comeback? What's he going to do during this term when there are enormous challenges, both domestically and internationally, put on his plate? Is he going to come into his own as a statesman and maybe cement himself as one of the greatest presidents in American history?
And we'll discuss that in our final segment when we return after these messages.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
Let me pivot from Jarrett's last comments about what is in front of Donald Trump. Obviously, being a lame duck president, he could really have a legacy that would be the greatest in the annals of history, or he could just blow up in flames.
Yes, I think what everybody is hoping for, of course, is that our country succeeds. I do not root for Republicans or Democrats. I feel like I'm always firmly on the side of the governed. And what motivates me in storytelling every day is not just to write anything, but to try and tell the American people what they need to know. And his actions will determine his legacy. And what we saw in the first term, which was unusual, right? Because we had a global pandemic in the middle of it. And so now there are other challenges in the country, challenges that he promised on the campaign trail to tackle. He's already lined up a lot of support, and he has a lot of agenda items that he wants to move through very quickly. There's always a lot of focus on a president's first 100 days. Already, though, we know he seems to be off to a better start than he was 4 years ago, when you just compare how disorganized things were in 2016, because he was so new to politics. And now going in, he's a lot more organized, starting with his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, who could be credited with his win in 2024.
Jarrett, we only have 30 seconds left. What should we look for from the First Lady, Melania Trump?
I think she's going to be very supportive of her husband. I think she's been actually a great backer. She isn't always as involved as some other first ladies are in politics, but I think she's always been the symbol of grace in the White House, and somebody who's actually been a very great first lady. Trump has always put her sort of a role role model first lady. It's interesting that the media hasn't quite.
Well, I'll tell you this, Jarrett.
Maybe that'll change.
She is a fabulous dresser, and style and class and grace. I saw her at that inauguration. These critics can say whatever they want to say, but she has got class and style, and we're out of here.
Absolutely.